Hello and welcome to the A-List. My name is Colin Hughes, and today with me is artist Jim Lutes. Hello, welcome.
Hi Colin, thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. All right, so we're going to jump right in, and we'll start with what got you into art, and what type of art do you do?
Well, I'm a painter, primarily. I do paintings, drawings, occasionally objects. I don't like to call them sculptures, but that's sort of what they are, I could guess. I started making art when I was young, I think, as a kind of retreat or a kind of way of making a world for myself, because the place I found myself wasn't always to my liking, and I guess a kind of fantasy world suited me. And I found making art was a good way to do that. I mean, I didn't think of it that way back then. I just found art more fun than the other things I did. I actually did photography for a while before I decided that painting was my thing. Through high school, actually, I was the photographer for the high school annual. I worked in a drugstore with some professional photographers, so I learned how to do that. But as soon as I got to college and started drawing and painting, took a few classes, I realized that there wasn't anything else that was going to make me as consistently happy as drawing and painting. I think that there's instant gratification when you draw and paint, and other forms of art don't necessarily provide that. So that became my favorite way to express myself.
Very nice. So for education, where did you go to college, and what did you go in for?
Well, I went to Washington State University. I didn't really declare a major when I first started, although I think my parents wanted me to be an engineer. And I took classes. I liked math, and I like engineering, or the things that go into engineering. But after making art, I realized that the real life of an engineer is one spent at a desk in a room. I didn't want a desk job, and making art seemed far more exciting and more dangerous and more interesting. The people that did it that I met at college were by far the most interesting people I had encountered. The town I grew up in, Richland, Washington, is in the southeastern part of the state. It's where the Hanford plant is. And there wasn't any art in the town. I mean, there were no artists that I knew of. We didn't even have an art teacher at the high school. So I wasn't thinking of it as a career option until I went to college. And so when I saw that it might be possible to do that, I jumped on it. After 4 years there, I graduated. I moved to Seattle for a couple of years, thinking that I would start to pursue my career there. But Seattle in the late 70s is when this was, late 70s, wasn't a very good place for a young artist. And so I thought I would go to graduate school, and I ended up at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, where I teach now. I've been teaching now for 30-some years.
Very nice. So let's talk about some of your beginning work that you started out with. What were your inspirations there?
Well, it depends on how far back the beginning you're talking about might be.
Let's talk about college.
In college,
Yeah.
I had a great painting teacher. I had several great painting art instructors. Galen Hansen was my mentor, and he's a painter of note in the Northwest. He's still living in Palouse, Washington, which is about 15 miles from Pullman, painting pictures. He has a gallery in Seattle that sells his work, and he's in his mid-late 80s now, and he told me that the last time I saw him that painting was a great thing for getting old because it gives you a reason to get up every day and keeps your mind busy without too much stress or strenuousness or anything. And he makes it look really good to grow old as a painter. But I forgot the totality of that question was.
Like what your intro art was here.
Yeah, well, Galen had a number of graduate students that came there to work with him, and I met those people, and they kind of took me in, and so I found an instant community. This is one thing artists really have to have, is a community of people to share their work with and to get feedback from and to learn from and experience things with. And I had that in Pullman, which is where Washington State is. And so I remember that very fondly as a kind of magical time. But all my work from that period was heavily influenced by Galen's work. He had a kind of a worldview that we all sort of operated within. And one of the reasons I chose to go to graduate school at the Art Institute was to get as far away as I could from his influence, so I could sort of become my own artist. And I achieved that after a year or two here. So when I think of my early work or my beginning work, what people would refer to that as, that's the work I did probably the second year I was in graduate school here, and that would be 1981.
All right, well, we're going to pull out some of your paintings when we come back on the A-list. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome back to the A-list. I'm Colin Hughes, and today with me is painter Jim Lutes. Welcome back.
Thank you, Colin.
All right, so now we're going to talk about some of your most recent work that you have had at your last show. What are some of the pieces like? And
the last two exhibitions I've done are a bit unlike the exhibitions I've had up to this time, in that they're thematic. An exhibition I had 3 years ago at Valerie Carberry Galleries, my dealer here in Chicago, was called Dumb Country, and it consisted of 4 large landscape paintings with a resin, a sort of rock made of trash and resin, urethane resin, and that the resin piece kind of echoed the form of some of the rocks that were in the foreground of the paintings on either side of it. It's one of those things that would be a little difficult to tell you what the object of it was, except it was meant to be an experience, and the experience is one of thinking you're seeing one thing, but having it actually turn out to be something quite different. In the case of the paintings, I took them from photographs that I took of a stream in northern Idaho that's very inaccessible. It's a place called Kelly Creek, and it's about an 8-mile hike from the nearest road. And I took these photographs sort of standing in the middle of the river, and the rocks are really astounding there. It's one of the reasons I took the photographs. But when I got back to the studio and looked at them, they were, well, and this is the way my work generally goes, I become obsessed with things, and at a certain point the obsession will take over, and then I'll start to make paintings about it, find a way. And in this case I did. Working from the photographs, I used a kind of old-fashioned technique of painting in a water-based medium, tempera, which is eggs and oil mixed together with pigment to make the paint. And this gives a kind of watercolor effect to the underpainting, and then I went over that with oil and other glazes, which are transparent layers of paint. But The result is that from a distance, the painting looks very much like the photograph, but as you approach the painting, you start to see my hand and the marks and other shapes and things that are defined that are somewhat a little bit below the surface of the painting, and it starts to get kind of creepy. And so my experience of the wilderness and these beautiful places is not like your picture postcard thing. They're kind of scary places to me because they're dangerous places to be. This place in the river, the rocks look that way because of the tremendous forces that they undergo every winter when the snow melts, and there are bears and other things. To me, it's like an alien landscape to me once it's examined. So anyway, that was the feeling I was trying to project through that work. And then the trash resin thing was a little bit different. It was more like that I got disgusted with how much garbage I was generating, just doing what I needed to do, and thought that I needed to find a way to make some work with this stuff. So I started kind of packing it together, and then after some time went by, I realized that I could incorporate it in this way and have this contrast between this real world and this sort of fantasy world, and that there isn't so much different when you get beneath the surface. I guess that would be what that idea might have been there. The most recent body of work was for a show that I had in New York at Valerie Carberry Gallery, also held in a space in New York on Madison Avenue. And the title of that show was Ponies and Psychos. It's a funny title, but it's actually, the title refers to this event that happened in the Northwest at the end of the Indian Wars in the 1850s. The Army, under Colonel Wright's orders, captured 900 horses that belonged to the they're not sure exactly which tribe they belonged to, but they captured them and decided that rather than to either try and keep them or turn them loose, that they would kill them. And so they slaughtered these 900 horses along the banks of the river. And I became aware of that because there's a sign on the freeway driving through there, just a sign that says horse slaughter camp. And I'd seen it over the years, but never knowing what it was. And starting to think about it, I did a little research and found out about this story, which actually that event ended the Indian Wars, because once the Indians saw how brutal and ruthless and murderous their foe was, they basically gave up and stopped fighting. And anyway, it's such a tragedy and atrocity to me that I got obsessed again with this. And one large painting that is in that show is taken from a drawing done by an artist named Gustavus Sahone, who was actually one of the cavalrymen who was a pretty good artist himself. And he documented a lot of the different things that they did when he was with the Army, the places they went to. And his is the only visual record of anything from that time. So I used his drawing like it was sort of one of my own field drawings and made a painting from it. And I projected that drawing onto a large canvas and then moved it around a couple times and tried to kind of capture the complexity of and the difficulty of addressing an event that happened so long ago, how stories are told and retold and they get lost in time, and especially in the digital age, things become unhooked from what their source was. And that's always been going on, but it's more extreme and more frequent now, I think, with the internet. And so other works in that show are based on that, themed loosely, or some very loosely, but some of the paintings in the show are more abstract, and that probably is more of what I do, are abstract paintings where I begin without any idea at all and just start painting. And as time goes by and I keep adding things to the painting, kind of rather randomly, some idea will emerge, and then the painting will sort of announce itself to me, and then I'll sort of finish it based on that idea.
Very cool. Very cool.
That's how it works.
So going into more of your scope as an artist, where do you exhibit?
Well, my dealer is Valerie Carberry, as I said. She has a gallery in the Hancock Tower, and I was in the Whitney Biennial, which the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York has a biennial exhibition of art every couple of years, obviously. And I was in that once in 1986, and then again in 2010. I've also shown, the other really big show that I was in was the Documenta 9, which they hold in Kassel, Germany. Documenta was an exhibition that they started in, I think it was 1960 or something, to try and get artists to come back to Germany after the war, because all artists, of course, fled. And now Germany is a great center of art again, as it was before the war. And so Documenta is a survey of world art. I've had exhibitions at other galleries in LA, and New York, and DC over the years.
Mm-hmm. So if people were to want to see more of your art, where would you send them to?
I would send them to Valerie Carberry Gallery. She has access to all of my work. I have a few paintings in the museums here, but they aren't always on display. The MCA has 3 or 4 paintings of mine that used to be on display pretty regularly, but haven't been for a while. The Art Institute has a few things too.
Very nice. And then last question, if some, like a high schooler, were starting out in art, what would you say to them? Just words of advice.
Wow. I guess be passionate. If something else is an option, then you might want to do something else, because art takes it takes a kind of commitment and belief in yourself when no one else really believes in you or cares at all whether you do it. I'm sure it's not the only field that's quite like that, but there are many times as an artist simply has to go on with no good reason at all, except for the joy and pleasure of doing it. So the people that succeed at art are usually the ones that really don't feel they can do anything else. Failure is not an option, or doing something else. And it's actually fine, because it's its own fulfillment. I mean, if you don't do well, I mean, being an artist is a lot of dealing with failure. I try to tell, I make an analogy to baseball. The best hitters that ever lived failed more than half the time, usually 2/3 of the time. And art can be like that at times. Not the failure doesn't necessarily have to be artistic, but it might be in a career. It's very competitive now, and if you love it and you really want to do it, then no one will be able to stop you, and those are the people that should pursue it.
Okay, well, thank you to my guest, Mr. Jim Lutes, and we hope to see you next time here on the A-List.